Stop relying on motivation. Build unbreakable discipline. Instead, why do you keep waiting for motivation when you already know it abandons you at the exact moment you need it most? You treat discipline like a luxury and motivation like some divine spark that will magically rebuild your life. Yet every collapse you've lived started on the day you depended on a feeling instead of a decision. That's the trap. Motivation is designed to rise fast, decay faster, and leave you weaker than before. It makes you believe you're moving while you're still standing in the same ruined place. And here's the part no one tells you. Relying on motivation is not laziness. It's self-betrayal. The quiet kind. The kind that erodes your identity while you pretend you're waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment. There is only the mind you build, or the mind that breaks you, and today you will see why discipline is the only force that cannot abandon you. The failure loop of motivation. Motivation deceives you because it begins with fire and ends with fog. It seduces you with intensity, not direction. In psychology, this is called affective forecasting. The mind overestimates how long a feeling will last and underestimates how quickly it collapses. So you start strong, imagining you finally changed, but what you actually changed was nothing more than your emotional weather. And weather never holds. This is why your life moves in loops instead of lines. Every cycle starts the same. A burst of energy, a vow of transformation, a short sprint fueled by excitement. Then the emotional charge evaporates, resistance returns, and you fall back into the same patterns you swore you'd escaped. You mistake movement for progress, effort for commitment, hope for strategy, and the collapse feels personal, as if something is wrong with you when the truth is brutally simple. You based your transformation on a feeling rather than a structure. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology put vocabulary to it. Epictetus warned that you are a slave to anything you need. If you need motivation to act, then your actions don't belong to you. They belong to the mood you happen to be in. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the obstacle is the way, because he knew the mind gains strength by confronting friction, not by waiting for ideal conditions. Nietzsche sharpened the blade further. The person who depends on inspiration will always be owned by the void that follows it. This loop is not an accident. Your brain is wired to conserve energy. Discipline requires sustained cognitive effort. Motivation requires none. So your mind defaults to the easier story, I'll act when I feel ready. But feeling ready is a psychological mirage. The feeling comes after the action, not before it. The internal architecture of a disciplined mind forms through repetition, not excitement. Look at your own history. Every moment where you broke your word to yourself began with the belief that your future self would be stronger, more willing, more energized. But that future self never arrived. You've been outsourcing your life to a version of you that doesn't exist. And every time you do, your identity fractures just a little more. You stop trusting your own intentions. You stop believing your own promises. This is the hidden cost of relying on motivation. It destroys your integrity from the inside. And here is the part that stings. You already know motivation doesn't work. You've lived the loop enough times to see the pattern, but you hold on to it because it gives you an excuse. It allows you to say, "not today," without confronting what "not today" has cost you. Your potential, your momentum, your self-respect. Motivation is not the enemy. Your dependency on it is. As long as you rely on emotional highs to move, your life will always stall the moment things get heavy. Discipline doesn't free you from struggle. It frees you from the illusion that struggle should feel good. If you want a life that doesn't collapse every time your mood shifts, then this loop must die here. Not by waiting for more inspiration, but by understanding the truth you've avoided long enough. Your feelings cannot carry you. Only your structure can. The Stoic principle of internal command discipline begins the moment you stop negotiating with yourself. Every internal argument you entertain is a crack in your sovereignty. Epictetus said that freedom is the exclusive domain of those who command their own mind. Everyone else is carried by impulses like leaves in the wind. You've lived long enough to know which one you are. Every time you wait for motivation, you hand over authority to the weakest version of yourself. Internal command is not mystical, inspirational, or emotional. It's mechanical. It's a psychological structure built on a single premise. The mind obeys what is repeated, not what is desired. Modern behavioral science calls this implementation intention, but the Stoics understood it centuries ago. You don't rise to your beliefs, you fall to your patterns, and right now, your patterns are trained to seek the path of least resistance. Think about how often you surrender without noticing. You say, 5 more minutes. You say, tomorrow I'll start. You say, I don't feel ready. These phrases sound harmless, but each one is a command that rewires your identity. They teach your mind that your emotions outrank your decisions, and when emotions outrank decisions, discipline cannot exist. You become a spectator in your own life, watching your potential dissolve in real time. The Stoics didn't worship feeling, they worshipped execution. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the body must do what is necessary even when the soul trembles. That wasn't poetry, it was neurological reality. Action precedes clarity. Movement generates control. When you act despite resistance, the brain undergoes a shift. Dopamine stops rewarding the idea of change and starts rewarding the evidence of it. This is how discipline reshapes you, through neuroplasticity forged by repetition, not enthusiasm. To take command of yourself, you must kill the internal loopholes you've been hiding behind. The if I'm in the mood loophole. The I'll wait for the perfect moment loophole. The I need to feel confident first loophole. These are psychological escape routes designed to protect your comfort at the cost of your evolution. Nietzsche warned that people choose unhappiness over uncertainty. You have done this repeatedly, choosing the familiar pain of stagnation over the uncomfortable effort of growth. Internal command is the opposite. It is the refusal to outsource your life. It is the decision to move without emotional permission. It is the construction of a mental environment where excuses cannot survive. And this is where most people fail, not because they lack talent, but because they never build the internal conditions that make discipline automatic. Look at the figures who shaped this philosophy. Frankl endured the unbearable, not because he was motivated, but because he decided what suffering meant. Jung confronted the darkest corners of the human psyche and realized that the enemy is always internal. Kierkegaard insisted that choice is the birthplace of identity. All of them understood what you've avoided. If your mind does not submit to your decisions, your life will be ruled by impulses that don't care about your future. Internal command is not loud. It is quiet, sharp, deliberate. It is the rejection of self-pity and the adoption of self-authority. When you say, I do this because I decided, you are no longer negotiating. You are declaring sovereignty. And sovereignty is the birthplace of discipline. If you want an unbreakable life, you must become unbreakable at the point where all your past selves collapsed, the moment of decision. This is where the weak wait for motivation and where the disciplined act. Identity shift, the death of the old self. You don't fail because you lack discipline. You fail because you are still loyal to the identity that collapses under pressure. People think discipline is a tool you pick up when convenient, but discipline is identity. If you don't become the kind of person who does the hard thing by default, every attempt at change will be temporary, fragile, and dependent on emotional weather. Identity is the strongest force in human behavior. Modern psychology calls this self-schema, the internal blueprint that dictates what you believe you're capable of. The Stoics understood this long before psychology existed. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up hoping to feel disciplined. He woke up as a man who believed discipline was inseparable from who he was. That is the difference. Discipline isn't something you apply, it's something you embody. Right now, you're trying to build a new life with the habits of your old identity. That's why everything cracks. You still carry the reflexes of avoidance, the narratives of limitation, the emotional vocabulary of someone who hasn't confronted themselves fully. Nietzsche wrote that a person becomes who they are only after burning away who they were. Yet you keep negotiating with a past version of yourself that has never produced the life you want. Identity shift requires betrayal, specifically the betrayal of your weaker self. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, absorbing the parts of you that fear responsibility, exposure, and discipline. This is not self-love. This is self-confrontation. When you remove the emotional padding around your excuses, you force the real structure of your character to appear. Most people avoid this because the moment they lose their excuses, they lose their shield. But you cannot evolve while protecting the worldview that keeps you small. And here is the truth that destabilizes most people. Identity is not found. It is constructed. Every single action you take is a vote for the person you become. Every repetition carves the neural pathways that reinforce your future. Frankl understood that meaning is chosen, not discovered. Kierkegaard insisted that selfhood is a continual becoming. The Stoics lived this truth daily. Character is not inherited, it is built. Look back at your life. Every time you quit something, every time you postponed a responsibility, every time you softened a decision to protect your comfort, your identity was being trained. You were teaching yourself that you cannot be trusted, that you bend, that you fold, and those lessons became reflexes. You're not undisciplined. You are extremely disciplined at being the person who avoids discipline. So here is the shift. You must decide who you are before your emotions vote on the matter. You must act in alignment with your chosen identity long before you feel like that identity is true. The action comes first. The belief follows. This is how the brain rewires itself, through evidence, not intention. Identity shift is violent in the beginning. It fractures your old narratives. It strips you of emotional crutches. It exposes how deeply you've clung to the illusion that change should feel comfortable. But there is no softness in transformation. You don't become steel through warmth. You become steel through fire. And when this shift finally settles, something extraordinary happens. You stop counting on motivation entirely. You stop negotiating with resistance. You stop performing discipline and start being disciplined. The gap between who you are and who you want to be closes, not through inspiration, but through identity alignment. Discipline becomes inevitable because it is no longer something you do. It is something you are. Failure as necessary fuel, the Stoic engine of growth. The reason failure keeps breaking you is simple. You still believe it wasn't supposed to happen. You treat failure like a malfunction, a sign that something went wrong, when in reality, failure is the only environment where the mind evolves. Nothing grows in comfort, nothing strengthens in ease. The Stoics understood this so deeply that they trained themselves to expect failure, not as punishment, but as the proving ground of identity. The problem isn't that you failed. The problem is that you interpret failure like a victim instead of a builder. Modern psychology calls this error-based learning. The brain rewires itself most aggressively when something doesn't work. Failure is volatile information. It exposes weaknesses, clarifies blind spots, reveals the exact coordinates where your discipline collapsed. But instead of using that data, you take it personally. You turn mistakes into identity wounds, and once you attach shame to failure, you sabotage the greatest mechanism of growth your mind will ever have. Look closely. Every major shift in your life began after something broke. The job that crushed you forced you to rethink your path. The relationship that collapsed forced you to confront your patterns. The goals you failed to reach exposed the illusions you held about who you were. Without those moments, you would still be the same person, repeating the same comfortable lies. Failure is not the enemy. Failure is the audit. It shows you the truth with a precision motivation never will. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action becomes the action. But you've spent years interpreting impediments as exit signs. You hit resistance and assume the universe is rejecting you. That's the fantasy. Reality is far more direct. Resistance means you've reached the edge of your current capacity. If you retreat, you stay small. If you push, you expand. This isn't philosophy. This is biology. Neural pathways strengthen through friction. Muscles grow through micro tears. Discipline is forged through violated expectations. You cannot become unbreakable without breaking. Nietzsche warned of the danger in protecting people from difficulty. You rob them of the very force that sharpens their character. You've protected yourself for too long. You cushion your failures with excuses. You anesthetize discomfort with distraction. You comfort your defeats instead of dissecting them. This is why your failures never transform into fuel. They remain emotional scars instead of structural upgrades. Here is the pivot. Failure must become mechanical, not emotional. When something collapses, you don't ask, "Why me?" You ask, "Where is the flaw?" Nuki, when you fall short, you don't drown in self-pity. You interrogate your habits. You analyze your systems. You extract the lesson without poisoning yourself with shame. This is the Stoic discipline of objectivity. Frankl said that suffering without meaning destroys the mind, but suffering with meaning forges it. Failure gains meaning through analysis, not avoidance. The moment you reinterpret failure, everything changes. What once felt like evidence of inadequacy becomes proof of engagement. What once triggered insecurity now triggers refinement. You stop running from mistakes and start hunting them because each one reveals the next step in your evolution. Failure becomes fuel because it exposes the exact location where strength must be built. There is no path to an unbreakable mind that does not run straight through failure. Not around it, not despite it, through it. Every collapse you endure becomes raw material. Every weakness exposed becomes a blueprint. Every moment you fall becomes the foundation for the person you are becoming. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the mechanism through which success is constructed. When you finally accept this, the fear dissolves. Failure loses its power to humiliate. It becomes a signal, cold, clean, precise. The Stoics didn't endure failure with apathy. They used it like architects use pressure, tension, and fracture. They understood that a mind protected from failure becomes fragile, but a mind trained through failure becomes sovereign. Your failures are not asking for your shame. They are demanding your transformation. The discipline. Algorithm. How to build a mind that obeys you. You keep failing discipline for one reason. You still believe discipline depends on willpower. It doesn't. Willpower is a biological resource, finite, inconsistent, easily overwhelmed. Discipline is a system, a structure, a set of preloaded decisions that remove negotiation from your life. If you rely on motivation, you collapse. If you rely on willpower, you collapse slower. But collapse is guaranteed. Only systems survive. Behavioral psychology calls this environmental determinism. You do not act according to your goals. You act according to your environment. If your surroundings demand nothing from you, you will become nothing. If your environment triggers distraction, you will become distracted. If your identity is not reinforced by your daily structure, your identity dissolves. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is architecture. Look at your routines. They are built on randomness. You wake up when you feel like it. You start tasks when inspiration appears. You stop the moment discomfort whispers. Every part of your day is a negotiation, and a negotiated life is a fragile life. Epictetus warned that a person who must debate every action is already defeated internally. Discipline begins where negotiation ends. The discipline algorithm is brutally simple but uncomfortable. You remove choice from the behaviors that matter. You automate the actions that shape your identity. You create friction for every habit that weakens you. Modern research calls this implementation design. The Stoics called it preparation. Jung called it the confrontation with one's inner chaos. Frankl called it alignment with meaning. All of them pointed to the same truth. Your mind obeys the structure you build around it. Without structure, your mind belongs to impulse. Think of your mornings. Are they engineered to forge stability or randomness? Marcus Aurelius rehearsed his entire day before sunrise, not because he was motivated, but because he understood that uncertainty weakens the mind. A structured morning eliminates emotional noise. It sets the psychological tone for the entire day. Clarity over chaos. Then consider your distractions. You don't lack focus, you lack boundaries. The average person loses hours to impulses because their environment is designed to hijack attention. Every notification, every open tab, every convenience pulls you deeper into mental fragmentation. Stoicism is the opposite of fragmentation. It is unification of intention, meaning, and action. If you want discipline, you must build an environment where distraction suffocates and intention breathes. Now look at your evenings. Most people let their minds decay at night with mindless consumption, but a disciplined mind ends the day deliberately. Review your actions, audit your failures, reinforce your identity. The mind learns during the transitions, the shift from wake to sleep, from noise to silence. If you end your day unconsciously, you train your mind to live unconsciously. The discipline algorithm is not glamorous. It is repetition, friction, and constraint. It is saying, this is what I do, and doing it whether you want to or not. This is where Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming becomes real. You outgrow the version of yourself that begs for comfort. You replace willpower with structure. You replace emotion with execution. You build a system that commands your mind instead of a mind that collapses under its own excuses. When structure becomes identity, everything changes. You stop falling off the path because the path becomes who you are. Discipline no longer feels like effort, it feels like alignment. You are no longer battling yourself. You are following the code you built, the framework that carries you when your emotions falter. Discipline is not a struggle, it is a strategy. And the moment you design your environment, your routines, and your identity to support that strategy, your mind begins to obey you, not out of motivation, not out of inspiration, but out of inevitability. Self-mastery through endurance. The Stoic path of non-negotiables. Most people fail because their discipline is conditional. They act when it's easy. They stop when it's painful. They push when it's exciting. They retreat when it's dull. A life built on conditions will always collapse under pressure. The Stoics built their lives on non-negotiables, actions that remain unchanged regardless of mood, weather, circumstance, or fear. This is self-mastery, the refusal to let external chaos rewrite your internal code. Endurance is not about tolerating pain, it's about using pain. Modern psychology shows that the brain rewires itself more aggressively during periods of stress. Pressure accelerates adaptation. Discomfort sharpens cognition. Difficulty activates the circuits that build resilience. Marcus Aurelius saw this long before neuroscience did. The obstacle is the raw material that shapes the mind. Pain is not an interruption to discipline. Pain is the forge. But here is the truth you've resisted. Endurance requires the death of your preferences. You cannot build an unbreakable mind while still worshipping comfort. Your preferences are the language of your weaker self, the version of you that negotiates, rationalizes, retreats, and collapses under emotion. Discipline is not built through preference. It is built through principle. And principle demands repetition, even when everything in you screams for escape. Look at your life. Every breakthrough you've had came from a moment where you endured something you didn't want. The job you hated taught you capacity. The challenge you feared revealed your strength. The rejection you suffered exposed your illusions. The pain you avoided delayed your growth. The pain you faced accelerated it. This is the paradox of endurance. What harms you temporarily is often what heals you permanently. Nietzsche said that the person with a strong enough why can endure almost any how. But your problem isn't your circumstances. It's your lack of a why strong enough to anchor discipline. When your purpose is weak, your suffering feels meaningless. When your purpose is strong, your suffering feels directional. Endurance becomes a choice, not an accident. Think of endurance as identity training. Every time you stay consistent when your emotions demand escape, you cast a vote for the disciplined self. Every time you resist distraction when your mind craves relief, you strengthen your sovereignty. Every time you continue despite boredom, fatigue, or frustration, you reinforce the neural pathways that define who you are becoming. Endurance is not passive, it is active self-construction. Jung believed that the strongest version of the self emerges only through confrontation with inner chaos. And chaos never arrives conveniently. It appears when you're tired, discouraged, uncertain. This is why most people never achieve mastery. They wait for stable conditions before acting. But stable conditions don't build character. Turbulence does. A Stoic does not ask for easier circumstances. A Stoic asks for a clearer mind, a more disciplined identity, a stronger internal command. Endurance isn't about proving something to the world, it is about proving something to yourself. That you are no longer governed by mood or fear or impulse, that you have crossed the threshold where action is no longer optional but inevitable. Your non-negotiables must become sacred. You do the work because the work defines you. You follow the plan because the plan protects you. You endure because endurance refines you. And when this becomes your identity, discipline stops feeling like suffering. It becomes the foundation of your freedom. You want an unbreakable mind. Then you must become the kind of person who cannot be moved by the forces that break everyone else. The unbreakable discipline principle. There is a moment in every disciplined life where the battle ends, not because the struggle disappears, but because the identity shifts so deeply that resistance no longer holds authority. This moment is not emotional, it is not inspirational. It is not the result of a perfect morning or a surge of motivation. It is the moment you realize that discipline is not something you pursue, it is something you become. Most people spend their lives trying to feel ready. You've lived long enough to know that readiness never comes. Readiness is a myth invented by the part of you that fears the consequences of commitment. But a Stoic understands that action precedes readiness, identity precedes confidence, execution precedes clarity. You do not wait for your mind to align, you force alignment through action. This is the principle that unbreakable discipline is built on. You do it because you said you would. That sentence sounds simple, but it requires the death of the weaker self you've protected for years. The version of you that negotiates, the version that delays, the version that collapses under mood, fatigue, boredom, or fear. That self has ruled your life long enough. It has kept you small, predictable, inconsistent. It cannot follow you where you're going. Psychology calls this the shift from state-based behavior to identity-based behavior. In state-based living, you act according to how you feel. In identity-based living, your actions flow from who you are. A person who sees themselves as disciplined does disciplined things whether they feel like it or not. A person who sees themselves as fragile will collapse regardless of how much motivation they temporarily feel. Identity decides everything. This is why your old efforts failed. You were trying to build discipline from the outside in, habits without identity, routines without commitment, action without embodiment. You tried to behave differently without becoming different. That tension eventually breaks. Nietzsche warned that a fragmented self cannot endure pressure because there is no unity inside to withstand impact. But when identity shifts, discipline becomes inevitable. You stop fighting the same internal battles because there is no longer an internal debate. There is only execution. The work becomes non-negotiable. And what once felt impossible becomes natural because it is aligned with the person you now believe yourself to be. Frankl understood this deeply. He taught that meaning gives shape to endurance. When you understand the why behind your discipline, the how stops mattering. Pain becomes directional instead of destructive. Resistance becomes information instead of intimidation. Obstacles become structure instead of sabotage. The Stoics didn't aim to feel strong, they aimed to be strong. Strength was not an outcome. It was a posture of existence, a way of standing in the world with clarity, conviction, and internal order. You are now standing at the threshold of that transformation, but crossing it requires a single decision: to honor your word above your mood. Because that is the final truth most people never face. Discipline is not built in morning routines, habit trackers, or motivational spikes. Discipline is built in the quiet moment where you say, "I will," and your actions echo that sentence even when your emotions rebel. If you want an unbreakable mind, this is the law you must protect with your life. You rise not because you feel ready, but because you said you would. And as always, the blade of this philosophy lands where it must. The Stoic IronMind speaks with clarity, not cruelty. It cuts illusions, not people.